The mist still shrouds the mountains of Minas Gerais on cold mornings, wrapping the ruins of São Bartolomeu in a ghostly embrace. Locals refuse to venture near the crumbling walls of what was once an orphanage, their whispered warnings passing through generations. In 2018, during renovation work on the municipal archives of the nearest town, workers discovered a hidden compartment behind an old bookshelf. Inside lay a collection of leather-bound journals, their pages yellowed and brittle, sealed in a metal box that had protected them from time. The handwriting within belongs to Dr. Mateus Almeida, a name that would soon become synonymous with the darkest chapter in the region's history. What follows is the account of events that transpired between 1897 and 1901, a narrative pieced together from these recovered documents, official records, and the reluctant testimonies of the few remaining descendants of those who witnessed these events. This channel is not for everyone, as the story that unfolds challenges our understanding of both science and human nature. The late 19th century brought prosperity to much of Brazil, but São Bartolomeu remained isolated, nestled high in the mountains where mists concealed it from the world below. The journey from Rio de Janeiro required 3 days by train and another 2 by horse along treacherous mountain paths that became impassable during the rainy season. This isolation preserved old traditions and superstitions among the local population of no more than 200 souls, most descended from Portuguese settlers and indigenous peoples. The centerpiece of this remote settlement was a monastery built in 1723, its stone walls and Gothic arches incongruous against the lush Brazilian landscape. By 1890, only 3 aging monks remained, their order dwindling as younger men sought opportunities in growing coastal cities. In April 1897, a letter arrived from the Bishop of Minas Gerais, informing the village elders that the monastery would be repurposed as an orphanage under the direction of the newly formed Scientific Charitable Foundation. The foundation promised to bring modern education and health care to the children of the region, particularly those left parentless by the recent fever epidemics that had swept through neighboring communities. According to municipal records dated May 12, 1897, the village council voted unanimously to welcome this development, seeing it as their chance to join the modern era that had thus far bypassed their mountain home. On June 28, 1897, 3 carriages arrived in São Bartolomeu. The first carried Dr. Mateus Almeida, a tall, slender man with piercing blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his dark beard. Having studied medicine in Paris and London, Dr. Almeida had published several papers on heredity and child development that earned him recognition in European scientific circles. The second carriage brought Sister Maria Conceição, a nun from the Order of Mercy, tasked with overseeing the spiritual and emotional welfare of the children. The third carried Professor Henrique Esteves, a chemist who had worked alongside Dr. Almeida at the National University in Rio de Janeiro. In his journal, dated July 1, 1897, Dr. Almeida wrote, "Our arrival was met with the curious stares of simple mountain folk. They gaze upon our instruments and books as if witnessing magic. Their isolation has preserved them from the scientific revolution transforming our nation. This remoteness is precisely what we require for our work to proceed without interference." The conversion of the monastery proceeded rapidly. The great hall became a dormitory lined with iron beds. The refectory continued its function, now serving orphans rather than monks. The chapel remained a place of worship, but it was the changes to the basement that proved most significant. Workers from outside the village, brought in specifically for this purpose, converted the old wine cellars into laboratories. Heavy equipment arrived on mule trains, carefully packed in wooden crates marked with the foundation's seal. When villagers inquired about these deliveries, they were told they contained modern educational materials and medical equipment to benefit the children. According to the testimony of Manuel Ferreira, one of the workers, "We installed glass cabinets, tables with marble tops, gas lines for Bunsen burners, and a strange contraption with electrical wires that Dr. Almeida called an observation chamber. We were paid well and told not to discuss our work with the locals. By September 1897, the São Bartolomeu orphanage officially opened its doors, welcoming 27 children from surrounding communities. Sister Maria managed their daily care, while Professor Esteves taught basic sciences and mathematics. Dr. Raul Almeida, nominally the medical officer, spent most of his time in the basement laboratories, emerging primarily for meals and official functions. His journal entries from this period focus extensively on his observations of the children, particularly noting physical characteristics, temperaments, and familial backgrounds. In an entry dated October 12, 1897, he wrote, "Subject 17 and Subject 18, the Oliveira brothers, present particularly interesting variations despite their shared parentage. The elder displays remarkable memory retention, while the younger shows superior physical coordination. Their differences within shared heredity provide valuable comparative data." The orphanage operated without incident throughout its first year. Children received education beyond what was available to most rural Brazilians at the time. The quality of food, clothing, and medical care impressed visiting officials, who praised the foundation in reports sent to Rio de Janeiro. Local families, initially hesitant to send their children to live under the care of strangers, gradually warmed to the institution. By summer 1898, the orphanage housed 42 children, ranging from infants to adolescents. What state are you listening from? The question of whether such prosperity came at an unseen cost would not arise until much later. On August 3, 1898, a significant event altered the trajectory of São Bartolomeu orphanage. A local midwife named Antonia Santos arrived at the gates carrying a bundle containing 3 identical infant boys. Their mother, a young woman from a distant village, had died in childbirth. No father was known, and no relatives came forward to claim them. The triplets, just 2 days old, were recorded in the orphanage register as Antonio, Bernardo, and Carlos, surname unknown. Dr. Almeida's journal entry from that evening reveals his immediate interest. "Providence has delivered to us a scientific opportunity beyond expectation. Identical triplets represent the rarest form of multiple birth, occurring in approximately 1 in 200,000 births. The potential for comparative study is unprecedented. Subject A, Subject B, and Subject C have become our highest priority cases." Within a week of the triplets' arrival, Dr. Almeida reorganized the basement laboratory, designating a special nursery adjacent to his main workspace. Sister Maria was instructed that only she and Dr. Almeida would attend to the infants. When she questioned this unusual arrangement, Dr. Almeida explained that premature triplets required specialized care to survive, care that only he could provide with his modern medical knowledge. According to Sister Maria's later testimony, "I believed him completely. The babies were so small, so fragile. When he showed me the incubator he had constructed, I thought it a miracle of science. I thanked God for bringing such a learned doctor to our remote community." Professor Esteves, however, grew increasingly troubled by his colleagues' obsession with the triplets. In a letter to his brother in Rio de Janeiro, dated September 20, 1898, he wrote, "Mateus spends day and night observing the infants. He takes endless measurements, blood samples, and notes on every aspect of their development. His dedication would be admirable if not for the troubling gleam in his eyes when he speaks of them. He no longer refers to them by name, but as the subjects, or by their designated letters. I fear his scientific passion has crossed into something unwholesome." This letter, intercepted by Dr. Almeida according to his journal, led to Professor Esteves being restricted from the basement laboratories. The triplets developed normally during their first months at the orphanage, though they remained smaller than average. Sister Maria noted in her records that they rarely cried, an observation she attributed to divine blessing, but which later evidence would cast in a more sinister light. Dr. Almeida's journal entries document weight, head circumference, reflexes, and behavioral responses with clinical precision. Beginning in October 1898, his notes indicate the commencement of what he termed developmental differentiation protocols. He wrote, "While nature has provided 3 genetically identical subjects, science demands we introduce controlled variables to observe differential development. Subject A will serve as our control, receiving standard care. Subject B will undergo enhanced nutritional supplementation with compounds derived from my earlier research. Subject C will experience sensory modification protocols based on the theories of neural plasticity emerging from Germany." The winter of 1898-1899 was particularly harsh in the mountains of Minas Gerais. Heavy snowfall cut off São Bartolomeu from neighboring communities for nearly 6 weeks. During this period of isolation, Dr. Almeida's experiments intensified. His journal entries become more technical, filled with chemical formulas and observation data. He notes with clinical detachment, Subject B shows 17% increased muscle density, but cognitive response delays of 0.73 seconds compared to the control. Subject C demonstrates enhanced auditory perception, but fails to maintain normalized body temperature without external regulation. These cryptic notes gain disturbing clarity when cross-referenced with the inventory lists found in a separate ledger, which record purchases of various chemicals including laudanum, chloroform, and compounds containing mercury and arsenic, all delivered before the winter isolation. When spring arrived and roads reopened, Professor Esteves departed suddenly from the orphanage. Official records state he received an urgent appointment at the National University, but his personal effects remained in his quarters, suggesting a hasty, unplanned departure. Dr. Almeida's journal mentions this only briefly. Esteves has returned to Rio, his nervous constitution unsuited to our important work. Sister Maria will now assist me exclusively with the subjects, her dedication to their welfare making her an ideal, if scientifically limited, associate. By their first birthday in August 1899, the differences between the triplets had become apparent even to casual observers. Antonio, the control subject, developed typically for an infant his age, though he remained small. Bernardo, receiving Dr. Almeida's nutritional supplements, had grown unusually muscular, but rarely vocalized, and showed limited response to verbal stimuli. Carlos exhibited extreme sensitivity to sound and light, reacting violently to stimuli that wouldn't disturb most children. When a visiting doctor from a neighboring town noted these abnormalities, Dr. Almeida explained them as the natural variations sometimes seen in multiple births, compounded by their premature delivery and difficult early circumstances. The visitor, impressed by Dr. Almeida's credentials and the overall condition of the orphanage, accepted this explanation without further inquiry. Before we continue with this disturbing tale, it's worth noting that what transpired at São Bartolomeu reflects the dangerous scientific overconfidence that characterized the turn of the century. The emerging fields of genetics and developmental psychology lacked ethical frameworks, with vulnerable populations often bearing the cost of scientific advancement. Leave a comment with your theory about how such atrocities could occur within institutions meant to protect the most vulnerable. Throughout late 1899 and early 1900, Dr. Almeida's journals document increasingly invasive procedures. Entries reference cranial pressure experiments, sensory deprivation intervals, and chemical tolerance assessments. Sister Maria, whose education had not prepared her to understand the true nature of these procedures, was told they represented necessary medical treatments to address congenital conditions common in multiple births. Her notes from this period express concern about the triplets' suffering, but defer to Dr. Almeida's medical authority. Dr. Almeida assures me the treatments, though causing temporary discomfort, will prevent greater suffering as they mature. I pray for these innocent souls each night and take comfort knowing they receive the most advanced care available. A critical turning point came in April 1900 when Carlos, the subject of sensory modification experiments, fell severely ill. Dr. Almeida diagnosed meningitis, though his private notes suggest he recognized symptoms of mercury poisoning from his own treatments. For 3 days, He remained in the basement laboratory with the sick child, refusing even Sister Maria entry. On April 17th, he emerged to inform her that Carlos had left this world despite his best efforts. The child's remains were buried the same day in the small cemetery behind the orphanage. The death certificate, signed by Dr. Almeida, listed congenital brain inflammation exacerbated by inherent weakness as the cause of passing. The loss of Carlos appears to have accelerated rather than deterred Dr. Almeida's research. His journal entries following the death display a disturbing shift in tone. The loss of subject C, while regrettable from a comparative standpoint, provides unprecedented opportunity for internal examination impossible in living subjects. Findings confirm my theories regarding sensory pathway modification through chemical intervention. Tissue samples preserved for future analysis. Subjects A and B will now receive modified protocols based on these insights. Throughout the summer of 1900, the surviving triplets underwent what Dr. Almeida termed accelerated developmental interventions. Antonio, previously the control subject, began receiving daily injections that, according to the doctor's notes, contained extracts from his deceased brother's preserved brain tissue. Bernardo continued his previous regimen with additional compounds Dr. Almeida formulated in the laboratory. The doctor's journal documents their responses with meticulous detail, noting changes in pupillary reaction, pain response, cognitive function, and physical development. A particularly disturbing entry dated July 29, 1900, reads, "Subject B demonstrated remarkable pain tolerance during today's procedure, maintaining consciousness throughout. Subject A, conversely, lost consciousness after 47 seconds of identical stimulus." The divergence confirms my hypothesis regarding neural pathway modification through controlled exposure and chemical reinforcement. Sister Maria's records from this period reveal growing concern. She notes the triplets' unusual behaviors. Antonio cries only when Bernardo is removed from his sight. Bernardo no longer speaks but communicates through a series of gestures Antonio seems to understand. Both children stare for hours at the spot where Carlos's bed once stood. I have reported these concerns to Dr. Almeida, who assures me they represent normal grief responses in twins who have lost their triplet. He has increased their medication accordingly. Her entry from August 15th reveals escalating unease. "I discovered Antonio with blood on his nightclothes this morning. Dr. Almeida explained it resulted from a nosebleed during the night and chided me for entering the nursery without his presence. He has now installed a lock on the nursery door, keeping the only key on his person at all times." The situation at São Bartolomeu Orphanage might have continued indefinitely had it not been for an unexpected visitor. On September 12, 1900, Professor Esteves returned, accompanied by Dr. Ricardo Monteiro from the National Medical Board in Rio de Janeiro. According to Dr. Monteiro's official report, their visit was part of a routine inspection of rural medical facilities. Dr. Almeida's journal, however, reveals his suspicion. "Esteves has returned with an official in tow, clearly intent on disrupting our work before its completion. Their presence threatens years of progress in understanding developmental malleability. I have secured the laboratory and relocated subjects A and B to the secondary facility prepared for such contingencies." The inspection proceeded without incident, with Dr. Almeida showcasing the orphanage's educational facilities, dormitories, and medical dispensary. When Dr. Monteiro requested to see the infamous triplets he had heard about from Professor Esteves, Dr. Almeida informed him that following the tragic loss of one brother to illness, the remaining two had been adopted by a wealthy family from São Paulo seeking twins. He presented adoption papers bearing the signature of Sister Maria, who later testified she had signed numerous documents at Dr. Almeida's request without fully understanding their contents. Professor Esteves, familiar with the layout of the orphanage from his previous tenure, noted that the entrance to the basement laboratories had been concealed behind a recently constructed storage cabinet. When he mentioned this to Dr. Monteiro, the inspector demanded immediate access to all areas of the facility. Dr. Almeida claimed the laboratories had been decommissioned following the completion of his research on childhood nutrition, the results of which he was preparing for publication. The storage cabinet, he explained, merely represented efficient use of space in the growing orphanage. That night, according to the testimony of a kitchen worker named Joanna Pereira, Professor Esteves was seen attempting to move the cabinet, concealing the laboratory entrance. Dr. Almeida discovered him, and an altercation ensued, during which Professor Esteves accused his former colleague of conducting illegal experiments on the missing triplets. Dr. Almeida vehemently denied these accusations, attributing them to professional jealousy and mental instability. Dr. A. Montero, awakened by the commotion, ordered both men to retire to their quarters, promising a thorough investigation in the morning. When dawn broke over the settlement, Professor Esteves was nowhere to be found. Dr. Almeida suggested he had left during the night, perhaps realizing the damage his false accusations could cause to his professional reputation. Dr. Montero, finding no evidence of wrongdoing during his inspection and eager to return to Rio de Janeiro, accepted this explanation. He departed later that day, noting in his report only that the São Bartolomeu orphanage appeared adequately managed with appropriate medical supervision, though somewhat isolated from modern oversight. The true events of that night remained undiscovered until 1923, when local historian Eduardo Mendes found Dr. Almeida's complete journals hidden in a sealed wall cavity. According to these records, Dr. Almeida had administered a powerful sedative to Professor Esteves and transported him to what he called the secondary facility, a series of caves in the mountainside where he had relocated the triplets. There, he subjected his former colleague to the same experiments he had been conducting on the children, meticulously recording his responses alongside theirs in what he termed comparative adult-child neurological reaction assessment. The final months of 1900 represent the darkest period in the São Bartolomeu tragedy. Dr. Almeida, now operating without oversight, accelerated his experiments. His journal describes procedures that can only be characterized as severe treatment of the most extreme kind. He notes performing what he euphemistically calls cross-comparative procedures between the remaining triplets, which involved tissue transplantation without anesthesia to observe pain responses and healing rates. He also documents cognitive transfer attempts that involved spinal fluid extraction from one brother and injection into the other. Professor Esteves, maintained in a semi-conscious state through chemical means, served as what Almeida called an adult control subject, enduring parallel procedures. Sister Maria, increasingly troubled by her limited access to the triplets and Dr. Almeida's erratic behavior, began keeping her own detailed records. In November 1900, she wrote, "I have not been permitted to see Antonio and Bernardo for 17 days. Dr. Almeida claims they suffer from a contagious condition requiring quarantine. When I hear sounds from the laboratory at night, he tells me they come from animals used in developing treatments for the children's condition. I have written to the bishop requesting another doctor be sent to evaluate the situation, though I fear my letter may never leave our isolated mountain." Her fears were justified. Dr. Almeida's journal acknowledges intercepting her correspondence and replacing it with his own letters describing the orphanage's continued success. His entry from December 3, 1900, reveals his growing paranoia. "Sister Maria has become a liability to the completion of our work. Her sentimental attachment to the subjects clouds her appreciation of the scientific importance of our discoveries. I have begun administering small doses of sedative in her evening tea to reduce her interference. She attributes her subsequent fatigue to the mountain altitude, a convenient explanation I have encouraged." The winter of 1900-1901 brought another period of isolation as heavy snow again cut off mountain paths. During these months, Dr. Almeida's journal entries become increasingly disjointed, mixing scientific observations with philosophical rambling about transcending the boundaries between distinct consciousnesses and achieving the unification of separate genetic identicals. He describes Antonio as increasingly lethargic and unresponsive, while Bernardo developed what he termed sympathetic physical responses to procedures performed exclusively on his brother. Most disturbing are references to encouraging results from the introduction of Subject C material into both living subjects, suggesting he continued to use tissue from the deceased triplet in his experiments on the survivors. The end came suddenly in February 1901. Dr. Almeida's final journal entry, dated February 17th, contains a frantic description of what he considered his ultimate achievement. Subject B expired at 0347 hours following the complete cerebral fluid replacement procedure. Subject A, despite receiving no direct intervention, expired at precisely the same moment, confirming absolute sympathetic nervous system synchronization. Professor E, connected to the apparatus as designed, experienced violent seizures, followed by unexpected vocalization, in which he alternately identified himself as Antonio and Bernardo, before expiring at 0412 hours. The successful consciousness transfer represents the culmination of our work. I have preserved all neural tissue for transportation to more advanced facilities where proper documentation of this breakthrough can proceed. What transpired in the days following these final experiments remains unclear. According to local accounts, a severe storm struck the mountain on February 19, 1901. Lightning struck the orphanage multiple times, resulting in a fire that consumed much of the main building. Sister Maria led the evacuation of the children, all of whom survived. Dr. Almeida was not among those who escaped the blaze. Initial reports indicated he perished attempting to save his research materials from the laboratory. The truth, as revealed in Eduardo Mendes's 1923 investigation, appears far more complex. Mendes discovered that following the fire, workers clearing debris found a hidden entrance to mountain caves behind the damaged laboratory walls. Inside, they discovered the remains of 2 small children and an adult male, along with extensive scientific equipment and preserved specimens. Fearing scandal that would reflect poorly on their community, village elders ordered the cave sealed and swore all workers to secrecy, a pact that held for over 2 decades until Mendes uncovered Dr. Almeida's journals. Most disturbing of all was the fate of Dr. Almeida himself. His body was never recovered from the fire or the caves. The last confirmed sighting comes from Sister Maria, who reported seeing him entering the forest during the height of the storm, carrying a large medical case and walking with purpose despite the dangerous conditions. Unconfirmed reports from neighboring villages in subsequent months described a tall, bearded man performing unusual medical procedures and asking questions about multiple births, but none of these sightings was ever verified. The São Bartolomeu orphanage was never rebuilt. The surviving children were relocated to institutions in larger towns. Sister Maria entered a convent in Rio de Janeiro where she lived until her death in 1947, reportedly plagued by nightmares throughout her remaining years. The ruins of the orphanage still stand, gradually reclaimed by the mountain vegetation, but avoided by locals who claim to hear children's voices on quiet nights. The scientific community largely dismissed Eduardo Mendes's findings when he published them in 1923, attributing the journals to fiction or the work of a disturbed mind. Modern analysts, however, note that the detailed descriptions of procedures and anatomical observations contain knowledge that would not have been common in 1900, lending credibility to their authenticity. Several of the techniques described presage legitimate medical developments by decades, including concepts related to tissue rejection, brain chemistry, and twin studies that would not enter mainstream science until much later. Perhaps most chilling are the reports collected by Mendes from families who adopted orphans from São Bartolomeu before its destruction. Multiple accounts describe children who experienced physical sensations when their former orphanage mates, now living in different parts of Brazil, suffered injuries or illnesses. Several reported dreams or visions of the triplets, despite having no known contact with them during their time at the orphanage. One adoptee, interviewed in 1925, claimed to experience memories that could not possibly be his own, including detailed recollections of Paris, where Dr. Almeida had studied but where the child had never visited. The case of the San Bartolomeu Triplets remains one of the most disturbing examples of scientific experimentation unconstrained by ethics or oversight. It raises profound questions about the vulnerability of children in isolated institutions and the potential for scientific curiosity to transform into obsession. What happened in those mountain laboratories cannot be fully explained even by modern medicine, particularly the documented cases of sympathetic physical responses between separated children and the unexplained fate of Dr. Almeida himself. The Brazilian government officially closed its investigation in 1927, sealing all related documents for 100 years. In 2027, these records will finally become available to researchers, potentially shedding new light on this disturbing chapter in medical history. Until then, the crumbling walls of São Bartolomeu stand as a silent monument to human suffering in the name of scientific progress, a reminder of boundaries that should never be crossed. As mists continue to shroud the mountains of Minas Gerais, local residents still report unusual phenomena around the ruins, particularly on the anniversary of the fire. Some describe the sound of children laughing, others the cry of an infant multiplied threefold. Most disturbing are accounts of a tall figure seen moving through the fog, carrying what appears to be a medical bag, still searching the mountainside as if looking for something or someone, lost long ago in the pursuit of knowledge that ventured far beyond the limits of both science and humanity.